Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're diving into the huge gap between what's written in policy and what actually happens to women navigating India's family planning system. It's a story of choice on paper, but on the ground, it's often a story of coercion.
So let's get right into it. Officially, India's policy seems pretty clear. Ever since the 1990s, the country has embraced the idea of reproductive rights and choice. But for so many low-income women, particularly in Muslim communities, what happens inside a state-run health center is a whole other story.
To really get a feel for this conflict, we're going to start with the story of a woman named Rashmi. She's a 26-year-old mother of two living in Delhi. So Rashmi goes to the local clinic for a very simple, very essential reason: to get her baby vaccinated, to protect his health. But what should have been a routine visit, well, it quickly turned into something else entirely. Basically, an interrogation. I mean, get this. Before she could even ask a single question about the vaccine, a health provider just glances at her card and immediately starts pushing her to get sterilized, a procedure known as nasbandhi. The focus wasn't on her child's health, it was on stopping her from having any more children. And the pressure didn't stop there, not even close. When Rashmi hesitated, the provider's comments shifted from a, personal suggestion to a deeply prejudiced accusation, blaming her entire community for India's population growth. So now Rashmi is stuck. She's facing this absolutely impossible choice. Either she gives in to their demands and gets a contraceptive method she doesn't want, or she risks her own son being denied life-saving vaccinations. And believe it or not, there's actually a term for this situation. It's called reproductive collateral. So to get the staff off her back and make sure she could come back for the next round of shots, Rashmi agreed to have an IUD, or a copper T, inserted. But the whole thing was a complete disaster. The cheap IUD they used actually caused a wound inside her, leaving her in constant, needling pain. She had to miss days of her domestic work, losing income she desperately needed, and then she had to turn around and spend money she didn't have on medicine just to treat the complications. Okay, so Rashmi's story shows one way women are forced to deal with the system, through painful negotiation. But other women, like 33-year-old Salma, have learned that sometimes you have to actively dodge the system altogether. When Salma was pregnant with her third child, she already knew the drill. She knew they were going to push hard for her to get sterilized. So she came up with this really careful multi-step plan to get the medical care she needed while still protecting her own bodily autonomy. So why lie? Well, it was literally a survival strategy. It's pretty much common knowledge in her community that after two kids, getting a safe hospital birth is almost impossible, unless, of course, you agree to sterilization. Her little deception was a calculated risk to protect her own health. And sure enough, after she gave birth, she refused sterilization. And just as she expected, she was met with shaming and direct threats that they wouldn't help her in the future. I mean, that's the price she had to pay for simply saying no. So, you often hear health providers label these women as irresponsible, ignorant, and careless. But the women themselves, they have a powerful counter-narrative to that whole accusation. They just see the world in a completely different way. They don't see themselves as careless at all. In their view, their actions are a form of samajhdari ki yojna, which basically translates to wise planning. And this quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. For them, being a wise planner isn't just a nice idea. It's how you survive. Every single decision, from buying food to family planning, is a calculated part of managing a really precarious life. So what we've got here are two completely clashing worldviews, right? On one side, you have the state providers looking at these women and saying they're irresponsible for their family size. But the women see themselves as the actual wise planners, focused on their children's future, and they argue it's the state that's really being irresponsible. And they've got receipts. They point to the state's own irresponsibility. It's laparwahi. Things like no clean drinking water, no proper sewage systems, garbage piling up everywhere. These failures by the state directly harm their family's health, which forces them to be even more careful in their own planning. Okay, so with all this immense pressure and this clear lack of support, what family planning options are these women actually being offered by the state? What's really on the table? Well, the system pretty much pushes two main options: IUDs and sterilization. Both of these are invasive, long-term methods that come with serious physical and emotional costs, and they often totally ignore what the women themselves might want, like less invasive ways to space out pregnancies. And who ends up shouldering this burden? A community health volunteer estimates that about 99%, that's right, 99% of the people who undergo sterilization are women.
And what's wild is that the health system itself reinforces this bias. Providers often just assume that men are careless and won't use contraception, so they rarely even try to talk to them. This lets men completely off the hook and puts the entire physical and emotional burden of family planning squarely on women's bodies. When you hear the stories of Rashmi and Salma, one thing becomes crystal clear. These women are not passive victims. Not at all. They are strategic thinkers forced to find a way through a deeply flawed and often hostile system. Think about it. They are constantly weighing risks, sharing information with their neighbors to stay safe, and making these agonizing decisions every single day, all to protect their bodies and try to secure a future for their kids. And all of this leaves us with one last crucial question. The state might label these women as irresponsible, but you have to ask yourself, when a system offers you coercion instead of actual care, is it possible that lying, evading, and resisting aren't signs of ignorance, but are in fact the wisest choices you can make?